We are recording the interview of John Monroe. The interview is being conducted by David Barry from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Dayton, Ohio. It is 3 p.m. on July 12th, 2019. Why don't we start with where and when were you born?
Born in Pyrtes, New York. P-Y-R-I-T-E-S, the metal. Pyrtes, New York in 1923.
And who were your parents and what were their occupation?
My mother she was a housewife, well, after she got married, but she worked as an office secretary. And my father was what he did. He was a department head for a paper company.
And then, did you have any brothers or sisters?
One sister.
And did you have any family members serve in the military?
My father, a short bit after World War I.
What did he do?
He was a recruit, I think. They sent him to school someplace, I believe, in Schenectady or somewhere in New York. I don't remember exactly where. But, thank you.
I know I was cold, so I figured.
Come around here.
I know, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry about that. Okay, respect.
that's better. Just that this has been broken a couple of times.
Oh, I got you. Do you remember which branch of service your father served in?
Army.
Uh-huh. So then, what were you doing before you joined the military?
Well, I was going to school. They finished up high school, which is not called high school in those days. 11th grade is the most, and I used to work summers in an automobile garage and learning how to build engines and so on. And but that had nothing to do with. I took my first airplane ride when I was 8 years old, and I fell in love with it. And so my objective from that point on was to fly airplanes.
So what made you fall in love with airplanes then?
Just that it was a great piece of machinery.
So then, I take it you joined the Air Force then?
It was not an Air Force, it was the Army
Air Corps?
Army Air Corps.
So then...
Well, by the way, I was drafted.
Okay. How did you feel about that?
I was working for Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank, and went to school during that period of time at Curtis Wright Technical Institute, where I got the engineering part of the flying. And the P-38 squadron was sitting there on that field. And then Bell and Lav of that airplane. But when I was in grade school, I used to work summer times in this garage, getting full of dirt, learning about automobile engines and stuff.
So, what year were you drafted?
1943? 44?
Probably was 41, Jack.
41?
You
Oh.
were in for like 3 or 4 years, right? You got out in 44?
Yeah. Time is
How old were you?
I was 18. 18.
Okay, 18, 1923 to 18, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah, 41.
41.
How did your family feel about you being drafted?
Had no required, no question about it. Do what you have to do.
Were you ready to serve or happy to serve, or did the idea of going to a border cross your mind?
No, they said, okay, now I can get to 5 if I can get through get into the Army. Then my objective was to fly.
Now, were you originally slotted to go into the Army Air Corps,
No.
or where were you originally slotted to go?
Well, I don't know about slotted. I had no desire to go anything other than where it was airplanes, basically the Army Air Corps.
Was it pretty easy to get into there, or was there anything special you had to do?
No, nothing. I had filled out all the forms and just waited.
Okay. So, it's 1941, you're 18 years old, you just got your draft letter, and you're finally getting to realize that you might have the possibility to go fly a plane like you always wanted to do.
Absolutely.
So, I take it, did you go to basic training?
I did go to basic training, yeah.
Do you remember where that was at?
Where is it in Florida? Florida's the beach.
Was it McDill?
Mid-
No. Could have been
It's
different.
on the coast.
Huh.
Where the heck was it? Well, I can picture it. In one of the hotels that the Army had taken over, the Army Air Corps had taken over, and so I went through basic soldiering in that period of time, and filling out everything that I saw from the Army putting out that said that first one came out and said that you had to have 2 years of college in order to be accepted into the Air Corps. And I kept watching the bulletin boards, and it says it's now accepting 1 year of college. And I had 1 year of college at Curtis Wright Technical Institute in Glendale. And so I said, that's me. And I got a response right back and said, you're accepted.
Did you get accepted while you were still in basic, or were
Yeah.
there some? All right.
Right. And so then all of my things that I was doing that was shuttled that way. I was on to a new course.
So then I take it flight school was your next stop?
It was a pre-flight, and in terms of that they were all their positions were open, so they sent us to different colleges to take courses and I first didn't solo the airplane that they had there, but I flew it on cross country. And they said, okay, you meet all the requirements. So then I went to pre-flight, which is really pre-flight in the Army Air Corps.
So how was all this training for you? Is there any stories you can remember or anything that helped you get through it?
No, it was, we had to do it, so we did it.
How was it adjusting to military life once you got in there?
No problem. I didn't have any problems with it. My folks traveled a lot every summer, so I knew where to go, places what to do.
Did you like the structure? And
Not a problem, yeah. Going through grade school, high school, whatever you want to call them, but they had no problem with the discipline or whatever.
so then, once you get through flight school, now you've got your flight status. Where is your first duty station?
First what?
First duty station?
I still say that has to be in training. And it was San Antonio, Texas to where they do all of the evaluations to find out whether or not you're eligible to be a pilot or a navigator or bombardier or whatever suit that they think that I had. So I was chosen to go to the flight school, and I did go through primary and then secondary and advanced flight schools, and soloed in each of them, and held out at the time that they were looking for pilots, and I happened to be one to go to the Air Force, the Army Air Corps.
So how did you feel when you got selected to be a pilot and got to fly your first solo?
Man, really living. Dream come true, yeah.
Was it everything you expected?
Yes. Well, the military, the discipline part of it, had no consideration in that anyway. I didn't know that there were discipline or no discipline. I just fell into what I was supposed to do. Cadets were cadets, and you do it.
So at this time, were you then still enlisted, or were you an officer at this point?
No, I'm enlisted.
Okay.
Special duty, I guess. With the rank and pay of a pilot, of a private.
Did you get any more for being a pilot, or?
Well, when I became a pilot, yes. Then we did that. I got money for that.
So, which aircrafts did you get to fly?
Anyone I could get my hands on, from Piper Cubs up to all of the basic flight training airplanes. Some of them were outside of the ordinary. Then I got to fly some of those with an instructor pilot on board, but it was my target was to fly B-38s. That was my target from the very, very beginning.
Why the B-38?
B-38?
Or P-38?
Yeah, P is in Paula. Mainly because I worked for Lockheed Aircraft Company for a period of time, saw it being built, listened to that thing fire up, and had the most beautiful exhaust sign sound of any airplane. It just hummed at you.
So, which kind of aircraft was that? Was that a fighter or a bomber?
It's a trainer.
A trainer?
Yeah. Well, it was a basic. It was a fighter airplane, but they were using them to graduate and qualify in that airplane.
Was that one your favorite then, or did you find
That-
another one that
That was my favorite from the very beginning.
So after you got done with all your flight school training, where did you go after that?
I was assigned to a training, not training, but assignment to a flight crew, as which I wanted to be a first pilot, but the offer was made to me as a co-pilot, and so I'll take anything that had wings and an engine.
So how did your duties differ being a co-pilot from a first pilot?
You know everything that the pilot should do, and you follow. Yeah, you do the tracking, everything that's on that instrument panel. You have to make sure that it agrees with your instrument, same instrument on your own. And so you advise then the pilot of any potential problems or anything.
So what did a normal, once you got on your flight crew, what did a normal duty day look like for you?
I was still going through training, having different courses in navigation, of course, and the other thing, flying an airplane. What the rules were on going from A to B from one contract to another one, that what has to be done for the airplane, and that was a lot of fun. Just taking brand new airplanes and testing them.
So were these aircrafts, were they brand new? No one had flown these yet before you, or were they
No.
just new to the Army Air Force?
They were. The P-38 was followed the P-40, but I liked the 38 because I thought the engines and the fact there's twin tails, and that was a very much distinguished airplane. And my duty at Lockheed, part of it was working out on the flight line, and learned a lot about that airplane. And so I wanted to fly a P-38.
So how long did your training last?
Almost 2 years.
Were there any memorable stories from your training that you can remember that stick out?
The last one, but the day of our graduation to get our wings, there was 2 of the cadets did not have sufficient night flying. And so at the graduation ceremony, the night before the graduation ceremony, the 2 of them were up in 2 separate airplanes with instructor, the tester. It was the testing. But the 4 pilots, student pilots, were in charge of the flying because they had to demonstrate. Yeah. And the night before the graduation, they had 2 airplanes that went up with 2 student pilots in each airplane to do their last number of hours to go. And they were finished, both of them, and the tower operator, all he saw was a couple of flights, and he was not, and he chose the wrong one to pull up and go around. And it was the airplane underneath. And pulled up, and the airplane crashed, and all 4 pilots were killed. The night of graduation at Ellington Field in Texas. Tough break when it wasn't their fault.
How did flying a plane is obviously very dangerous. Was there any coping mechanisms that you used to help with the danger of it, or were you ever afraid flying?
No. Never was afraid of it. I'd fly anywhere in the airplane.
Trusted it that much?
Yeah.
So, and then after you graduated and got your pilot's wings, I mean, 2 years for training, that's quite a bit of time. Did you feel prepared?
Absolutely. I'd gone anywhere to fly anything.
So where did you go after you graduated?
I was assigned, I wanted to get P-38s, but I never ever got a chance to go to, I never qualified, I guess, to go P-38s, because I loved that airplane. But I became a co-pilot on a B-24. And learned to all of the systems and all that sort of stuff. Do all the duties of the co-pilot. Still wanted to be a pilot, the first pilot. That didn't come right then.
So how different was the B-24 from the P-38?
2 different airplanes, 2 different purposes, 2 different qualified. One's a very high speed. Bombers are not known for their high speed.
So the B-24 was a bomber then?
Yeah.
How did you feel about being on a bomber instead of a fighter pilot, or instead of a fighter plane?
I was flying airplanes, and that was the main consideration. I still had the desire to fly P-38, but it never did come my way. But
Did you like the B-24?
yes,
Or what were some of the things that you liked about it?
it was newer, better, could fly faster, glide higher, carry a bigger load than a B-17, the other 4-engine airplane.
Had they put heaters in them yet, or when you flew
They
them?
had heaters.
Okay. So then how long were you a co-pilot for the B-24?
Through the first 15 missions. And the second 15 missions, I was the first pilot.
So then were you stationed overseas when you...
Yes,
where were you stationed at?
the Pacific.
I mean, did you have any preference on where you were going to go? Either the Germany tour or
No, you were assigned to do what you do. Yeah,
So right out of training then, straight into combat?
pretty much, yeah.
Was there anything you did to prepare for that, or were you just trained to do it and ready to go?
Well, being the co-pilot, you don't have the command responsibility, of course. Flying the airplane is flying the airplane, and use the same skills, no matter what size it is.
So, what were your missions like? Were they generally pretty much the same, or did they differ or change mission by mission?
Well, since we were in the Pacific, we were essentially getting the Japanese out of the occupation of their property, to keep them getting further away from the full world and closer, of course, to the Japanese homeland. And ultimately, we would have gone what we did do, is that we bombed the heck out of it.
So, were they mainly bombing missions then?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, and you were saying that the B-24 had a much larger cargo hold. Would you go out fully filled and come back empty?
Most of the time it comes back empty. Sometimes it doesn't they don't get to the target and they drop in a random area.
Did you have a pretty good flight crew and loading crew and navigators?
I think we had the best flying crew of any of them. Personally. Obviously, they were great people.
Or what made them the best?
They worked out well together. You know, helped each other do whatever they need to do. And it was a good crew.
Did you get to keep the same flight crew the whole time you were in the Pacific?
No. Because I got to be a first pilot on other crews. The pilot may have been ill or something, and they'd moved me over there to take over as first pilot. So it all worked out beautifully.
Tell them about how your pilot liked to go past the B-17s.
Yeah. Everybody at that period of time, they all thought that B-17 was B-24 was an inferior airplane to the B-17. And but my first pilot didn't believe that. So when we were doing some training stuff over out of Riverside at March Air Force Base, that if he heard a B-17 in the air, because they were building in Lockheed, right in the road, that he'd say, "Okay, let's go get him. Let's go find him." And he loved to come up behind the airplane and come up close to him. It would feather one engine. Feather means shuts it down, of course, and went right on by the B-17 on 3 engines. So left a setback there. And my pilot, he was, yes, we did it.
Why did some feel that the B-17 was better than the B-24?
The news media working in England. They all lived in beautiful hotels and stuff of that nature, and our ones never ever even got the combat area in the Pacific. So they never wrote anything up about them in the South Pacific, because that was very hush-hush, and nobody where they were going, what they're doing. But the ones over in England, I say England, Great Britain, was their short flights from London to Paris type, or something short. And of course they had heavy armament on the ground, and they took that as these big airplanes, and they peppered them with shot, and they fell out of the air. But it was a better airplane. It's a 24 myself. I'm not biased.
During any of your missions, were you ever peppered or attacked by anti-aircraft?
Yes.
Would you just do banking maneuvers if that happened, or?
You have the mission requirements, and you follow within the target. You may encounter anti-ISM fire that en route to the target, but and it's of course over a lot of land. Vis-a-vis ours is over a lot of water.
Was any of your aircrafts ever shot down, or did you ever have to
Yes.
bail out?
Yeah, I never had to bail out. But we lost airplanes, yeah.
Were you on one that got shut down? Did you have to do
No.
Okay.
No, never did. Several good friends of mine that went through flight school together did live their lives down the Pacific. But that's life.
When your plane did get attacked, did you have aircraft that sustained a lot of damage that may have had to take a long time to get repaired? And
Not that I recall that if there was any. If they came back not very easily compared, they junk it. Don't waste a lot of time keeping some crazy airplane on the ground.
So you said that your first 15 missions, you were the co-pilot, and then
Yeah.
your next 15 minutes, you were the first 15 missions, you were the first pilot.
Yeah.
During your first 15 missions, was there anything that made you ready to become the first pilot for the next 15, or was it just your time? Or how did you get promoted from co-pilot to first pilot?
Well, there's again the first pilot. He may have gotten another assignment that didn't require, might have been administrative or into combat before you go up planning the missions and so on. But it's a better thing to be driving yourself rather than.
How did you feel about all that added responsibility now with being the first pilot?
Not a problem. It was not a problem. And during those last 15, I may have been the lead airplane on 20-odd airplanes behind me. Whatever.
How did that feel, being the lead?
Great.
So you were very much like a lead from the front type
Yeah.
of person?
I don't know that I did anything different than anybody else, but for some reason or other, I think my skill or my abilities were recognized, and I had a lot of fun doing it.
Do you remember how long you were in this Pacific?
Well, I got into Pacific Christmas. It was that month of Christmas. And flew back at the end of the war. General Grant at one time, first things that we're going to scrap all the airplanes on the ground. and he had a change of heart on there, and he says, no, we're going to send him back. We're going to fly him back to the state. And since I was the flight operations officer, he says, and Palmer, you get these airplanes back to the state. So I took the best crews and got them going, and I saved the last one for me.
Wow.
I flew the last airplane out of last B-24 out of the Philippines.
Wow, that's pretty rare. Or how did you feel being the last one to leave?
I thought everybody had, well, it was a lot of the crews, they just went back on ships. But the co-pilot, navigator, flight operations, or the mechanic, the staff, and that's all we had. 5 people on an airplane taken back. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier didn't have a chance. His job was done. And brought the airplane into to Mather, is it Mather, over by Sacramento? I don't remember the name of the airport now. But it flying out in from the trying to think of what was the name of the airplane to Hawaii. We fueled and then they had to be sure that the airplane was defensive, being decontaminated for bugs and stuff in there, and refueled and on the way. And so I was like the last one out and the last one to arrive.
How did you feel when the war ended?
Hey, big deal. It's over. Get home.
Were there any missions or any stories from any of your time over in the Pacific that that kind of stick out or are memorable?
How about your check ride in B-25?
Interesting thing. This, I was went down to up to Bomber Command. There's a routine thing being flight ops. You'll get, and so I thought, well, I'd drop into the bar up at headquarters and have a drink and head back to the squadron. And there was only one guy in the bar. It was a major. And, so I sidled up by him, and we got talking, and what do you do, and so on. He says, well, I'm the general's pilot. And he says, and then I said, what does he fly? What are you flying in a modified B-25? And I said, well, I've never been in a B-25. He says, well, I'm going to make a flight hop tomorrow morning. If you want to go, come on down. So I went down that next morning, be there at 7 o'clock. And he was already there, the pilot for the governor general, the general's pilot. And he says, we'll be given about an hour to check out the airplane. So I got down there earlier, enough to tell the chief, the line chief there, that he said, I'm riding in the right seat. And he says, we already know that. And so they the general showed up and he says, "Do you have my itinerary, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." "No rate of climb over 500 feet per minute. No banks or turns over 15 degrees. Do you understand that, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." And I had to fly the airplane like some brand new pilot, but so everything went along smoothly into each of the one of the stations that he went to, did the protocol stuff and all that. The star on the flag out of the pilot's windows indicating general officer is on board, and make sure that the right number of staff cars are there to meet and all that stuff. And I got through that with no real big deal. So everything along real smile, and unless the last leg going back to our base. The left-hand engine started detonating and losing power, and so I got the crew chief who was on board the airplane. And I said, "What do you know about this?" And he says, "That's never happened before." And so what do you recommend? And he says, "Well, let's reduce power on that and increase the other engine to max continuous." And I said, "Okay, let's do that." And everything was pretty fine there. And until the right-hand engine started doing the same thing. And so rather than to have the general get his feet wet, I had the radio operator to call search and rescue to launch an airplane, PBY Fat Catalina, on our inboard heading in case I have to ditch this airplane. I don't want the general to get his feet wet. And he did show up, and he pulled in formation, and both engines were there now, big and not being good. And we kept a close eye on it, and the PBY was there dutifully with us and flying with us. And so I got the airplane back on the ground, actually, and then shut both engines down. And fire trucks over everywhere. We got the general back down the ground, perfectly dry, except oil was all over the left-hand engine. He gets out of the airplane on the left-hand engine side and got oil all over his beautiful airplane, his uniform. And he was pretty hot and bothered about it. He didn't say anything about the flight in with one engine down and all. I got back to my base, and he says, "The general, you are now grounded." I said, "Oh, okay." And I talked to the crew chief, and the crew chief said he'd take the engines off, both of them, send them to depot, and have them evaluate. And what had happened, the two engines were one cylinder number apart from each other. And inside of the thing, they had the wrong heat treat on one of the valve lifters. And it caused those lifters to collapse and made the engine backfire. And when the report came back in, it was strictly an operation. It was failure, equipment failure. And so I put it back on defense, flying again. And I flew the general some more times. He trusted me now.
No.
But yeah, it was It was an interesting experiment. I've never had that opportunity to. I never ever called him by name. He never ever called me by name. Pilot, navigator. Yeah, I flew him around, but he'd just give me an itinerary, and I'd take him there. No questions asked, no nothing. Do it. And that's the last I heard of it. And I was back on flight status again when the report came in on the engines. And shortly after all of that, I came home.
How was it coming home?
Flew the last B-24 out of the Philippines. I was the last one to fly it out. I thought that was pretty neat. Yeah.
So how was it for you when you got back to the States?
Pretty good though. I was offered to move over to the suspected Air Force becoming an Air Force group, like an Army or a Navy, or be an Air Force. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I didn't really, I wanted to be more than, I want to get into the design and building of airplanes. So I told him I declined the offer to go to permanent. Nothing is permanent. But the opportunity would go with when they change over to being an Air Force rather than an air group. I went back to college. Went to work in Douglas Aircraft. By then, it was Boeing. What's the other one? St. Louis. McDonnell Douglas. And then it became McDonnell Douglas Corporation. And I didn't like what was going on, so I decided that's it. So I resigned. I said, enough of this. I resigned at 62. And said, let's travel. Told my wife, let's travel. So we did. End of story.
And did you meet your wife while you were in the service, or after you got home?
I met her while I was in service. When I said I went to this preschool stuff when they changed over to, I went to one of the colleges in West Virginia. And like everybody else, instead of going directly into pre-flight timing, they sent them to a school where they thought there might have been a deficiency. Yet the people like teaching just teaching the mechanics of flying from A to B to C. How do you get there? All of that bit. And it was learning, and I actually did solo an airplane one time, a little one cub type thing. And they said, yeah, he's a good candidate to go. So that was, yeah. It was a great course. It was all over with, of course, and what else can you say?
Did you and your wife, or when you went over to the Pacific, were you guys still dating, or were you married at the time?
Dating.
Did you guys write letters back and forth?
not particularly one to the one that I married. No,
No.
another lady, but I was working at a plant, paper mill plant in Arkansas, and I back up a little bit. While I was at this pre-flying school, where they sent all of the cadets to college, I met a girl there, and we conferred. We communicated back and forth over the week. She ultimately came down and visited my folks, and I visited hers folks and got new to each other and all of that. And she wanted to get married, and I said, well, this is before going to war. And they said, well, you know, things are pretty unsure of in terms of me going into combat. And so let's stay this till it's over. And so April 15th, I get a letter from her. Dear John, an honest to goodness Dear John letter. I have married a sailor, of all things, a sailor. And so I just said, okay, that's it, done. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. But then when my mother said that she wanted to go up and visit her sisters and brothers, since the war was on, she couldn't travel. But so I said, well, Mom, I'll drive you up there. And so I got the maps out and charted my course to go up there. And went right through Huntington. And I said, ha. So I varied my course and wound up at her doorstep there in Huntington, West Virginia. Knocked on the door, and my girlfriend that was going to marry me was standing there, and she was shocked at the fact that I was there. And I said, I have just two things to say to you. I said, hello, goodbye. Turned around and walked away. Got in the car, and my mother says, what was that all about? So I never talked to her again until one other time. I was working this paper mill, and the lady that was on the switchboard at noontime to relieve the switchboard, the lady that was the manager, office manager, I knew who she was and all, and I said, she had called me to drive over to Memphis and pick her up and take her down to my spot. And I said, no way. Hung up the phone. I never, over our marriage, ever said anything to either of us about what did we say, what did you say to her when she wrote, phoned and said wanted me to come pick her up. She never brought it up, and I never did either, so I don't know whatever happened to her, and nor do I care.
Were there anyone you served with that you became really close with? Any camaraderie between your fellow either crew members or people who served in the Army Air Corps with you?
Not really. I knew guys that I'd trust my life with them, but we didn't come to bosom buddies or as such. I knew guys and knew them quite well, but I don't know that I would have gone on anyway, become whatever. But different times, different strokes.
Well, I only have a few more questions left for you.
Go for it.
Are you currently involved in any veteran organizations, such as VFWs or INVETs?
I'm a member of the VFW, and the technical organizations, of course, I know I'm a member of some of those. But nothing going back to building airplanes or anything more. I was more on the administrative side. And I retired at 62.
After you retired and you told your wife that you wanted to go travel, how far did you get? Did you end up going around the world, or?
Neither of us had passports. I said, well, okay, let's each of us go down and get a passport. And I'd wanted to go through the Panama Canal. And my wife didn't care. She'd go anywhere. So we scheduled a trip on Guadalajara, I think is where I flew. The two of us got our passports the morning that our flight went out that afternoon. So we had the passports and we made it. Flew to Guadalajara and picked up a cruise ship there, and then went down through the Panama Canal and all. And then we said, hey, this is good stuff, good life. And so he says, let's do it more. And so we started on going to travel, one of which was our kids. One of the things I wanted to do to be sure that they saw our country as a country. And every summer we'd take 2 to 4 weeks of time, depending upon where it was, and we toured the United States, because this is what your home is like. Is this the whole thing from top to bottom, and treat it kindly. And they did. My son also is retired now. Only he retired, but he really didn't want to retire, I don't think, but he did. But in the meantime, he was contacted by the California Long Beach State University in California, whatever that is. And he became a professor of economics. And he is now a professor there, but he's also working for a company. So he's busy. My daughter, she graduated, she's retired her job as a vice president of finance and microbiology. She's got licenses in England, Europe, United States. She can go and she can practice anywhere in those. She goes every year to continued education, I think they call it. And so she stayed busy, and I stayed busy.
That's good. Well, is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered or should be added to this interview?
Ray has got a good. He's got a good thing. But you see anything that I have not covered, Ray?
Well, you didn't actually cover the check ride when the guy took you in a B-25 when he was throwing the prop,
Yeah.
throwing water off the props.
Yeah, they. I'm not sure how that thing got resolved. Oh, they found with the engines that couldn't lost their power. The word came back from there that it was manufacturer's oversight. They put the wrong heat treat lifters in the engine. And there's, I don't know how many of them in the whole engine. But anyway, all of them were the same. And they were engines apart. One cylinder. All of these were the next one following this one. So what went bad with this one went bad with that one over there. So I had no bearing on its failure.
When the guy that was the general's pilot got him in the bar one day and said, "Hey, why don't you come with me for a check ride on a B-25?"
Oh.
And so he gets him out there, takes off, and he's low enough on the water that he's actually throwing spray off the props as he's going down the ocean. There's spray coming up off the props going up and over the airplane. He's that close to the water.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I think, was where actually, in retrospect, is that he knew that there's something wrong, and it wasn't pilot error. And I was forgiven, and went back to work for the general, who became a general officer. He was a general. He was a brigadier general when I had him. And Ray had looked up some information on.
He was in charge of the 13th Air Force during the World War II in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
So he was in charge of the whole theater down there.
Right.
Wow.
And I was his pilot. Not bad. Works pretty good on the
On the resume?
on the yeah, on the resume, But actually, we got along all right after we got over the initial thing. But he's the one that when I turned the airplane in Sacramento, and I can't remember now what the field name was there. But the guy, as I came in, we said, "We have a message for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, it's from the general." And so, "Oh, okay, what is it?" And he wanted me to become a part of that new staff to start up the new system. And I should have probably taken it, but life was full of should-haves. But he rose to be full general, I think.
What's that?
He became a full general
He was brigadier general.
when I knew him.
Where did they go?
But that's not bad on your resume.
No. Well, I only have one question left for us.
Shoot.
That was Carl Amadeus Brandt, and it talks about, if you go down a little bit, it talks about when he was in the South Pacific in 1943. He was in charge of about everything down there, it sounds like, the way it's.
Wow.
No, that's who we flew around.
Oh, thank you. Well, back to my last question. Is there any message that you would like to leave for future generations who review this interview?
Oh, jeez. I've never given any thought to that. I'm sure that when I decide to cash the check into the last one, that it's probably not going to be anything different than the other ones. But, I fulfilled a number of desires that I've had throughout my life, and especially the flying of airplane. I still go to air shows. I just love brand new airplanes. I don't know that I ever think that somebody's going to be able to fly from here to New York by going in through the outer space and down there. I don't think that would ever be. I don't think that. There's too many hazards in the route.
This concludes our interview. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this interview, and thank you for your service.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure working with you.
And as well as you.